Good Tuesday afternoon to you. I am Dylan Ratigan, and today's big story, Auction 2012. Yes, the quest for power in America. Another primary day. Voters are at the polls today in California, New Mexico, New Jersey, Montana, and South Dakota. While the presidential race is set, of course, these states have congressional primaries on their ballots. And in Wisconsin, just the third recall election in U.S. history is underway. Governor Scott Walker facing off with Milwaukee Mayor Tom Barrett. Walker has outspent his opponent 7-1. The polls close in 5 hours, and despite $63.5 million in ad spending, this will all come down to voter turnout. We know typically primary turnout only 10%, which is why, of course, nobody likes any of the candidates because nobody participates in the selection of those very candidates. But the Wisconsin recall variance from that. It's actually expected to see turnout as high as 65%. This, as a new poll today shows, voters across the country, at least by whatever the measure of these polls may be, are more polarized than any time in the past 25 years. Which is odd when you consider how much folks seem to agree to things when you just talk to them in a room. The gap between left and right, statistically, they say, has doubled since '87. And joining us now is Joe Costello, former campaign advisor over a stack of campaigns over 3 decades and author of a new book. It's entitled Of, By, For: The New Politics of Money, Debt, and Democracy. And Joe, you say, and you start your book with a quote saying, "We do not need a revolution in America. We need a reformation." Will you explain that comment?
Sure. We have, this is a 200-year-old and what the founders of this country called an experiment in self-government. And it's kind of gone off the tracks at this point. And so what we don't need is a revolution where, they started this country 200 years ago by overthrowing monarchies and,
violent outbursts and all this.
Right, and it was successful all over the world, right? I mean,
right.
200 years later, there's not very many monarchies in power, if one or two. So what we need is reform. And literally by reform is reforming, like taking things and redoing it. So we have this architecture, this system of self-government, but it's not working, and it's not working for a whole lot of reasons. We've had, and one of the biggest reasons is that people have kind of become disenfranchised from it.
Well, I would say that is the biggest reason is people, obviously my narrative at this point and my point is fairly well understood. And folks come up and they say, what do we do? What do we do? And the number one thing is people feel that there isn't something for them to do, and as a result, they disengage. You disagree with that. You believe there is something for everybody to do, and you talk about us as the heroes of our own stories, effectively. So what would you have us do? What would you have the disenfranchised do, who I think correctly observe the problems and are looking for answers?
Right. So, as you've pointed out numerous times, we have an electoral process which is really important because that's the vote. And that's in the end where it comes down, where people make decisions. And that is completely corrupted and dysfunctional. And so if you keep going to that system that is broke without first stepping aside and creating something different that people can be involved in and where their voice actually matters. And really the first 2 steps of this, and what we have to do is organize. And the first 2 steps to organizing are, one, education, which you do a very great job on this show.
Just even more awareness.
Yeah, just
understanding what's going on around here.
Well, for example, banking. Nobody knows how the banking system works in this country.
More know than they knew 4 years ago.
That is true, and thanks to your efforts,
and a lot of other folks,
and a lot of other folks, right? But still, people don't know. So we won't have a reform of the banking system if people don't know how
awareness
it works.
Reaches critical mass.
Exactly.
So your point is the first phase is to get awareness of any problem to a critical mass,
right,
which is a necessary prerequisite to anything else happening.
Right, and then the second step in that is talking to each other. We don't talk to each other politically anymore. We don't have the dialogue to do that. 10 years ago, I would tell people, I can stop a political conversation instantly in about 3 sentences, whether I know you're liberal or conservative or whatever, because there's only a couple things I have to say, and then you're going to shut me out. And
which was what? Give me an example.
Well, just for example, like, you say,
I'm your Uncle Bob. You're going to shut me down in 3 words. What do you got?
So you say to, a quote-unquote conservative, there's problems with our market system.
Right. And then the brain shuts down.
Yeah, and then, or you...
Or about your liberal cousin.
Right, and for a liberal, cousin, you go and say, well, you know what, I think D.C.'s a problem.
Right, and so in that way, then they're done with you.
Right.
So I think a lot of folks agree with what you're saying, and again, in the premise of your book, which is that we're the heroes, we have to do this, and that the beginning of doing this is expanded awareness, one, and talking to each other, two.
Right.
The talking to each other has been where we seem to have a lot of problems. Awareness is a lot of problems. Talking to each other as well. So how do you recommend folks get beyond this sort of bifurcated shutdown?
Right. By going to these problems that we have, like, for example, banking. And, I've had a couple conversations on the road while I've been doing this book, with people who, would say they're conservative or they're liberal. And I just say, here, let's not talk about conservative, liberal. Let's not talk about Democrat, Republican. Let's talk about the banking system. Or let's talk about oil. And let's talk about, how you've been paying every time the economy starts going again, the price of oil is going to go up again. And,
Right. So once you get to that awareness, right, then what happens?
And then talk about these issues and then start saying, how are we going to change this? How are we going to start changing, the way the banking system and the money system works in this country? Mm-hmm. Now, 120 years ago, 130 years ago, the populists had that very conversation. They were, and at that point, 50% of the Americans were involved in agriculture, right back in the 1880s, 1890s when the populists going. They had it, and these were like just average farmers, dirt farmers, and they had a conversation about money. They said, how does this money system work? What is money? Not just like who controls it, but what is money and what would do and how should it work? And they came up with some very ingenious ways to do money differently than what eventually went out, which was the banks and the Fed.
Sure. So but you're saying absent awareness and absent talking to each other, reform is impossible.
Yeah. I mean, and it's like, and a lot of people, as soon as you say, well, we got to start talking to each other, they kind of go, oh, that's kind of trite. And it's not trite. It's essential. If we don't do that, what's trite is going and saying, well, if we elect Obama or we elect Romney, that's going to make a difference. Because it's pretty obvious, and it's obvious to everybody that that's not going to make much difference, right? And then the thing is it's going to say, but then there's nothing else for people to understand how how they identify with politics in this country, right? So they don't know what to do, and that's just got to get created. And what it's got to get, there has to be an understanding with people that this is how this country has always changed. It's been about people getting together, from the revolution to, Andrew Jackson getting rid of the first bank, the second bank actually, to the populists, to the labor movement, to the civil rights movement. All through American history has been the people. The suffragettes, yeah. I mean, name them,
Yep.
And all through history, it's been people who've looked at really large forces and thought they were powerless until they got together and started saying, we believe the same thing, and we need to do something about it, right?
And this is, we pick your metaphors, the dualism, whether it's the Tea Party, the occupation, the libertarians, the progressives, pick all the splitting, that we're not as divided as we appear to be, but we won't find that out unless we talk to each other.
Right, and the fact of the matter is that the political process is set up to separate us at this point, so that we don't, that's how we're, doing things.
Right, the system is designed to retain power by splitting us. We take our power back by unifying around issues.
Right.
By recognizing that we're the hero of our own story and that this is the history of our country.
Exactly.
And the book is Of, By, For, The New Politics of Money, Debt, and Democracy. The author, Joe Costello, 3 decades working on these very issues. And as you can tell, I'll go out with Joe anytime and help him sell his book because I agree with him. Congratulations on putting this together.
Thank you very much.
Joe Costello. Check it out.